Outside, the dark, brooding Christmas day moved heavily to twilight. The wind, howling bleakly, ruffled the shawls and hats of frightened women gathered whispering and glancing in the snowy yard. Josie and Mary and John and the strange doctor fussed incessantly about the still unconscious and occasionally moaning Frank. Annie had the old rocker close beside her husband now. The baby was asleep in her lap. One of her thin, work-worn hands held Frank's hand. Dan came back with the nurse for Ida. John Concannon was free for a few minutes to step upstairs, and Josie waylaid him in passing and drew him into the big bedroom next to Ida's, the bedroom that had for so long been Jim's. Would he just look at Marty and Rose Agnes? Wouldn't it be the terrible thing if this was mumps after all? They had a brief talk, husband and wife, and then Ma came panting up to find Josie in frightened tears. "Shame upon you, Josie Callahan, the way you would be weeping and lamenting over such a thing entirely," said Ma roundly, half shaking and half embracing the terrified Josie. "Wit poor Annie never lettin' a cry out of her, and the child smilin' up in the face of her, and his father all but dead on him." "All but dead?" Josie echoed, shocked, and instantly upon her feet her tears died. "Ma, is he so badly hurt?" "We don't know yet, dear," said John gently, but he slowly shook his head. Josie looked from one to the other, her lips steady, and a new look in her eyes. "Why, mumps are nothing," she said quickly and reassuringly. "Rose Agnes would have to have them sometime, and I don't know where I'd rather be than here with Ma. I'll put her in one bed, Ma, and Marty in the other, and John can go back home without me when he has to go." "Well, now you're talking like yourself, dear, and you're a great comfort for all you're so nervous about your child entirely," her mother said in approval. "And is Ida better, John?" Josie asked sensibly as she dried her eyes and began to examine the available blankets and pillows. "Ida," he said, smiling a little, "you know what's happening there." "What?" Josie whispered aghast, and as her look met their answering significant glances, she turned a little pale, undecided whether to laugh or cry. "Ma!" she faltered, and then, "Ma?" "Well, why not? Sure, she's much more comfortable here with the pack of us to look out for her," Mrs. Callahan said reassuringly. "It won't be much work. I've got the turkey pretty well cut up. We'll have a big pot of stew and a sheet of me cornbread for supper, and that'll be enough with a plenty of tea all night in case me young lady here," she glanced toward Ida's room, "keep us all up. And please God, it'll be a healthy baby boy or girl, for it's a little soon, and give Jim something to fill up the poor broken heart of him." "I'll get these youngsters to bed and fire up the other stove," said Josie. "Mumps, is it?" asked Mary, who had just come in and stood in her water and blood-stained Christmas finery, smiling at the now consciously important Marty and Agnes. "Well, never a dull moment. That's your house, Ma. Kat's come in," she added, "and she said she'd take Helen and Matt home with her, the way they wouldn't get the contagion. And Jewel Mooney's here. She's got the kitchen like a pin. Dan's gone on to find Jim. I'll give Jim Callahan a piece of my mind walking off on all of us this way," Mrs. Callahan said heartily. Her daughter's surprised looks met. There was in them a certain deep amusement and relief. It was good to hear Ma scolding and bossing again, and Ma went downstairs with a step that had not echoed so buoyantly through the shabby old house in months. She had mourned, she had brooded, she had petted and sympathized with Jim, but there was no health in it that compared with this sturdy and vigorous resentment. "You'd think it would kill her," Mary whispered, following. "Well, there's no help for it anyway," Josie said. At 7 o'clock that evening, Jim Callahan came quietly downstairs and into his mother's kitchen. He looked weary, but there was a look of utter peace upon the handsome, dark face, and his Irish blue eyes were dark with happy tears under the black crust of hair. His mother, in an iron gray calico with a great stiff white apron tied about her waist and a knitted pink and gray shawl about her shoulders, was seated in a big rocker by the range. A good fire was going, and now she rose, opened the oven door, and placed before her son a great plate of smoking, delicious food. Jim looked at her a little timidly. Her expression was magnificently stern. But it was wonderful to him to have Ma, her old, scolding, busy self, again managing the whole crowd of them with this scornful, brisk superiority. He brushed his face against her arm affectionately and said boyishly, "Go on, Ma. Jump me and have it over. A big, strong feller like you, his mother began readily and witheringly, stravaging the streets on Christmas Day like a Turk that has no home, and poor Ida and the little one een lying up there and might be dying like Rosie Costello herself, and you may be at the minute buying yourself a cigar. I didn't buy myself any cigars today, poor Jim said meekly. I I'm ashamed of myself, Ma, but somehow, being Christmas and thinking of him, the square little friendly feller he was. Well, now, you've got another boy to worry the heart out of you and have measles and sauce you back and play hooky and smoke cigarettes on you the way you done on me, his mother said roundly and unemotionally. Did Kate give you a peek at the child? She brought him in. Idy and I had a look at him, and then Idy went to sleep, Jim said, grinning and then openly wiping his suddenly wet eyes. He seems a fine little feller. I am grateful, Ma. I'm not going to let little Frances's going spoil everything for Idy any more. I'm going to take her and the children out for picnics the way we've always done. I know I've made it hard. I'm sorry, Ma. I don't know what got into me, but it'll all be different now. You'll see. I wouldn't wonder if the Lord would take the others now if there's any more of this running off from your good wife and breaking her heart on her, his mother warned him sternly. Yes, I know, Ma. You'll see, Ma. Well, I hope I will, Mrs. Callahan said briefly. Fine goings on for the man of the family, she muttered. And now, she added suddenly with a glance at the closed dining room door and in a lowered voice, now maybe with Annie, poor girl. Jim's face shadowed. I know it, he said quickly. It makes me ashamed that I ever thought of my own trouble. Ma, we'll stand by her if poor Frank don't pull through, won't we, Ma? She'll have her mother and her mother's home, and we'll do what we can, his mother said with a sudden quiver of her handsome mouth. Any change, Ma? And Jim glanced in turn at the dining room door. His mother compressed her mouth, narrowed her eyes, and slowly shook her head. Mary and Dan, returning from a trip to their home, where Cecilia and Helen and Matt were established for the night, quietly entered the kitchen, shuddering with the cold, and powdered with the first flakes of a fresh blizzard. Any change, Ma? Mary whispered, and any change, Ma? Josie, returning from a last glance at the victims of the mumps, echoed anxiously. No, there's no change, their mother answered with a significant look, and heavily she added, there'll be no change. John's there, and poor Annie sits there. She won't go to bed. We'll have to stand by poor Annie now, girls. Oh, Ma, we will, Mary and Josie cried passionately, one on each side of her chair, on their knees, arms locked about her. She and her children will never want, Jim said steadily. Poor Frank didn't speak to me, but when she was out of the room, I knelt down beside him and I said to him, and the look that came into his eyes, he knew what I meant. There's many a millionaire that doesn't leave his children what Frank Curley does. You said the truth then, Mrs. Callahan assented with a great sigh. And for a few minutes there was silence in the warm, orderly kitchen. Then Ma roused herself, glanced at the stove, glanced at the clock. Well, I'm going to set me bread, she announced, rising. With sickness in the house, there's not much good in baker's stuff. Christmas and all of us together for a little celebration, and look what's in it. May God make us resigned. Life's short for all of us. But in the firm, capable hands that reached for the pan, and in the bend of the straight back, and in the keen glance of the black Irish eyes, there was no sign of breaking. Life and death were hovering over her house, and the future was chaos, but the years had brought back the Callahan children to Ma's guidance and Ma's service, and the heart of Agnes Callahan, little as she or anyone else suspected it, was singing a song of gratitude and triumph within her breast. The end.